Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our lesson on acting. And I hope you enjoy this week's lesson, and I hope you're finding having these pre-recorded lessons helpful to you. So, acting, unlike production design, is one of the elements of film meaning that is very noticeable to us, and people will often comment on acting and what they feel constitutes a great performance, or what has constituted great acting. So people are often very interested in acting and will respond very positively to acting, but often people don't realize that there are issues specific to film acting that need to be taken into account. We tend to base our appraisal of the performance on whether or not we feel that an actor's performance was realistic or powerful or compelling to us, but we don't look at other issues that affect film performance as well, such as what are some of the fundamental assumptions that will determine an actor's approach to a specific role. What are some of the things that a film actor has to take into account that a stage actor doesn't? So I'm going to look at a couple of those issues today, and I hope you find this lesson interesting. So, firstly, traditionally, acting has taken place in a theater because film as a medium really wasn't invented until the late 19th century, and even at that point, film for its first few years was primarily a documentary medium. People didn't portray fictional stories on films. Fictional stories being portrayed on films really only start to occur a couple of years into the medium. So people soon very quickly figured out that film acting itself requires different techniques, different approaches, and different assumptions than those that were required in traditional theater acting. The first assumption of traditional theater acting has been that the actor needs to modulate his performance or her performance so that the person in the theater the furthest away will be able to see and hear the performance. So film, by its very nature, having a camera that can move and therefore the perspective of the audience can change, completely changes the way that an actor has to modulate their performance. So, first factor that an actor in film often has to consider is lack of rehearsal, because theater productions tend to be a live event performed in front of an audience that unfolds in real time, and any unexpected issues that crop up need to be dealt with instantly. Most theater productions are very, very thoroughly rehearsed, and actors are very, very carefully blocked in terms of what physical space they will occupy on the stage, how they will modulate their voice during certain scenes. All of those things are very carefully rehearsed before the theater production actually opens, and then, even when the theater production opens, there will be a set of earlier performances called previews, in which the director and the actors can again make any changes they want to their performance before the show is considered to have officially opened. The amount of rehearsal available for film productions varies hugely, so often very big budget tentpole productions will have months and months and months of rehearsal, and actors will have, again, substantial periods of time to prepare for their roles. Lower budget productions will not have the luxury of being able to afford to pay actors for rehearsal time, so there will be very, very little rehearsal time. During the classic Hollywood period, it was not uncommon also for screenwriters to be making changes to a script all during the production process. So frequently, actors would get new pages of the script, new lines, which they were previously completely unfamiliar with, literally the day before or the morning that they were going to shoot an important scene. Also, an actor can be hired as a replacement for another actor at the last minute, and again, literally be handed a script the night before a scene is about to be captured. So there is a huge variance in the amount of rehearsal time that may be available to an actor. Some actors get lots of rehearsal time, others get none whatsoever. The second factor is that budgetary factors in the film themselves will create a shortage of time. So a low-budget film needs to be shot quickly. The director is only can only manage to capture so many takes of a particular scene and stay on schedule. So again, this will impact the amount of time that actors have to rehearse and prepare for their roles. This can also be shaped by director attitudes as well. Alfred Hitchcock, for instance, was a notorious, some people have described him as a control freak. He was a notoriously meticulous director. He had control over literally every aspect of the production process and the final cut of the film. He would rehearse his actors extensively because he wanted them to behave exactly in a specific manner before they stepped in front of the camera. A famous Italian director named Roberto Rossellini, on the other hand, Rossellini was one of the famous Italian neorealists. He would rehearse his actors so that they would get a sense of their character in mind, and then literally on the day of filming, the scripts would be tossed out the window, and he would ask his actors to improvise the scenes based on their understanding of their characters. So again, no real rehearsal of the actual scene there at all. Another major factor that impacts an actor's performance to a role on film would be that many films are shot out of continuity. They have to follow strict production schedules. So, in order to cut down travel costs and costs associated with moving equipment and setting up cameras and preparing to photograph from one location to another, frequently all of the scenes that take place in one location will be shot at once, regardless of where those scenes unfold in the beginning, middle, or end of the narrative. Also, in Paul Thomas Anderson's film Magnolia, Tom Cruise's character shows up constantly throughout the film. He is a constant character appearing in many different scenes throughout the film. However, while the film was being shot, Tom Cruise was only actually available for all of 3 weeks. So all of his scenes were shot during one period of time, despite the fact that they were dispersed entirely throughout the beginning, middle, and end of the film. So films are often shot out of continuity. Often the ending of a film may be shot before the beginning of the film. And this creates an issue for the actor because whereas in a stage performance, the actor can portray a very clear progression of a character, a very clear development of a character's emotional change throughout, or physical change for that matter, throughout a play. An actor working on a film often has to orientate themselves to how a particular character would be feeling at a particular point in time. For instance, portray an emotional reaction to a previous scene, even though that previous scene hasn't been shot yet. So, actors still need to present a convincing character development, even when scenes are shot out of continuity. As stated on the slide, economies of time and cost will determine the shooting order of scenes in the film. Actors will also often have to perform the same scene several times. They'll first be asked to perform the scene, for instance, in long shots with other performers. Then they'll be asked to re-perform the same scene to get medium shots and close-up shots and reaction shots. So the actor has to modulate their performance. They actually have to play the same scene several times in a manner that still manages to appear to be emotionally consistent when the final film is assembled during the editing process. All right, another issue that actors have to deal with when film acting is the issue of amplification of gesture and expressions. Remember what I stated before. Stage actors modulate their performance for the furthest person in the audience away from them. So a stage actor walks out onto stage and is doing their best to make sure that the people sitting in the far seats in the balcony can clearly see and hear them. So a stage actor is giving a performance under the assumption that the viewer is 100 yards away. Cameras, because they're placed close to the performer, tend to amplify gestures and expressions. There's an old saying that was around Hollywood during the classical Hollywood period, which gave the effect that if you want to have to create the same effect in an audience that you would by having someone slam a door in a stage production, in a film production, have them raise an eyebrow. That gestures tend to wind up being very, very amplified in film productions. So film production encourages a much more restrained style of acting. So what I'm about to show you is a short clip from a famous 1983 film called The Dresser, in which Albert Finney portrays an aging, classically trained theater actor, and I just want you to watch this very short clip just to get an idea of the kind of gestures and facial expressions that he makes. So here, the acting troupe is approaching a train station. So you hear him saying, "Stop that train!" And he's using this huge, grand gesture to motion to the train conductor. I'm sorry, the phrase lost me for a second. In order to get them to stop the train. And this is a classical style of acting that we associate with theater acting. Huge, grand gestures, loud, booming voice. But when we see that close up on film, it looks, I'll just back up the frame a second. We see that in front of us on film, and it seems to us to be, as you can see, he has this massive twisted expression on his face. It seems to us to be incredibly over-exaggerated and incredibly unnatural. Now here's a still, a little bit earlier, for the same actor, again portrayed by Albert Finney, who is himself a wonderful actor, and he's preparing for a performance as Shakespeare's tragic king, King Lear. So let's have a look. It's a little hard to see, but it's a little clearer here. I'll just run the clip. His dresser faces. Okay, here's a, whoops, I just got a little beyond it. But again, you notice that he has, even when he's speaking to people in his dressing room, he uses these very, very over-determined and over-exaggerated vocal styles. And if we can just get a quick look here, have a look at the costume again. The hair, the makeup, they're very, very intense. They're made to be very, very visible from a long way off. And that, although it makes the character visible in a theatrical production, here's a much better still, you can see it, when we watch it on film, it appears to be incredibly over-exaggerated and incredibly overdone to us. So filmmaking tends to encourage what we would think of as a much more restrained style of performance. And by the 1950s and the 1960s, a minimalist style of acting was being encouraged by many different acting schools and many different actors' studios in order that actors would appear to be more natural and more realistic when acting on film. One actor who is associated with a minimalist style is an actor named Clint Eastwood, who you might all be familiar with But I remember one of my own instructors, when asked about Clint Eastwood, used to complain that he doesn't do anything. He simply stands there on screen and doesn't do anything. Well, actually, Eastwood does do several things when he's giving a performance, but he works under the principle, again, that less is more. Raising an eyebrow on camera gives you the same effect as slamming a door on stage. A slight nod on camera can give you the same effect as striking someone on stage. So remember the clip I just showed you of Albert Finney in the dresser with his very grand gestures and his very broad facial expressions? Now watch Clint Eastwood in a scene from Unforgiven. So Eastwood is playing this scene with another wonderful actor named Gene Hackman. So again, just note while I show you this clip how these actors follow the less is more principle.
I don't deserve this. To die like this.
He's speaking quietly.
I was building a house. Deserves got nothing to do with it.
And again, he says calmly, deserves got nothing to do with this grimace on his face. He says, yeah, in a very voice. Slight intake of breath there, and squints as he pulls the trigger. So again, you have this minimalist style of acting. So very, very small, precise gestures, very, very soft changes in intonation of voice produce very, very great emotional impact in the audience because the camera itself tends to magnify the impact of the performance. Other things that people don't usually take into account when they're thinking and evaluating a film performance is exactly what film actors are required to do. So a film actor actually has to adjust their performance depending on where the microphones on the set are placed. If the microphones are placed a little further from the actor will be expected to raise their voice a little bit. The actor will also be expected to know how to act in terms of what kind of lens the camera is using and what the depth of field of the shot is. The actor will need to know where they're going to stand in order to actually be in the shot. The actor will need to know where to stand in terms of how the scene is lit. And the actor needs to, if the actor is to be visible on screen, they need to understand where the key light is placed and where the fill lights and the backlights are placed relative to that, so that they'll be able to be in the proper position again, so that the camera will capture a visible image of them, and they'll be required to adjust their performance for any camera movements that are considered to be necessary throughout the scene. So I'm just going to give you an example of what is called hitting the mark. All right, so here we have a clip from a film we're going to see a little later in the semester called Casablanca. So you'll notice that this actor, Humphrey Bogart, right now, he's seated at a table playing solitary chess. Now he's going to look up in a second as some people approach him. All right, so he looks at the door, and you'll see that these four actors are all standing in a particular position. So you have the doorman, who is standing to the extreme left of the screen, gentleman in a tuxedo in the middle of the screen, woman wearing a hat at the extreme right of the screen, and you have a gentleman in a fez in the background between the man in the tuxedo and the woman wearing the hat. So let's watch a little more of the clip. So, clip's gone a little further. Now the doorman is still to the left. You have another gentleman in a tuxedo to the right of him. We now get a reaction shot of Rick looking at them. Shakes his head. Oh. And now another close-up shot. The previous shot was a mid-shot, but now this is a close-up shot of the two actors. You'll notice that the doorman is still to the left of the man in the tuxedo, and the man in the tuxedo is still on the right. They proceed out into the hallway, and you'll notice that doorman is still on screen left, man in the tuxedo still on screen right. Now, they go back into the saloon, and they're in the same relative positions. Now, doorman is still on the left, man in tuxedo now in the center, Rick is on the right, and you'll notice how Ugarte is about to sneak his way through. So, let me just back that up a very little bit. So here we have still doorman on the left, Ugarte in the middle of them, man with tuxedo now to the right of Ugarte, Rick on the extreme right. So all of these actors, in order to remain in the same consistent positions throughout the screen, throughout the scene, so that they can actually be seen on the camera, are actually standing on marks. The production assistants have actually put pieces of tape on the floor telling the actors where to stand, and that's what's referred to as hitting the mark. There's a little bit of a funny story that goes on with this concept of hitting the mark. This actor here, Peter Lorre, well, he was a bit of a practical joker, and what he tended to do on a lot of films, including this film, Casablanca, is when everybody else on the production team would break for lunch and go to the studio commissary to have something to eat, he would usually excuse himself to go to the washroom, would sneak back onto the set, and would peel up all the marks, which would create big havoc and big chaos in the afternoon, because the production assistants would then have to reblock the entire scene. So hitting the mark is very important. A director named, an actor I saw interviewed who used to work in a lot of films with a famous director named Sam Peckinpah. He was talking about his very, very first experience as a film actor. He was well known as a stage actor. However, he hadn't broken it through into film for a few years, and finally he was hired by a great American director named Sam Peckinpah to play a part in a film called The Wild Bunch. And he very carefully and studiously prepared for his scene, made sure he remembered his lines, remembered exactly how he was going to perform the scene, and finally, when the day of shooting came, the director said, "Roll film," and he went through the scene and just acted his guts out, and Peckinpah yelled, "Cut!" And Peckinpah said, "That was brilliant. That was wonderful acting. That was one of the more wonderful performances I've ever seen. Unfortunately, it's not going to be in the final film because you're standing on the wrong side of the camera. You're standing behind the camera, not in front of it, and nothing that you just did was actually captured on film." So, hitting the mark, very, very important thing to do. So here's another scene which demonstrates the importance of hitting the mark, and here, the reason why hitting the mark is important is the actor needs to be in a specific position with regards to the lights to achieve a specific effect, which is going to be important in the development of the film. So this is a scene from a film called Citizen Kane. For many years, many people thought it was the greatest film ever made. It's now considered to be, well, the second greatest film ever made, according to the Sight and Sound list. Alfred Hitchcock's film Vertigo seems to have now outshone Citizen Kane. So, in this scene in Citizen Kane, the idealistic young man, Kane, he's just started a new newspaper, and he's a very idealistic young man. He wants to make the world a better place through his newspaper, and he's decided that he's going to publish a declaration of principles. He's going to guarantee to all the readers of his newspaper that the news is going to be delivered honestly and fairly and without bias, and that he will always be a champion of the people's rights, as long as he is the editor of this newspaper. Now, over the overall direction of the film, it follows Kane's progress from being a very idealistic young man who wants to do good things in the world to cause change, into a very corrupt and rich older man. And as the film progresses, he winds up pretty much violating all of the principles that he felt were important when he was a young man. So, in this scene, when he's signing the Declaration of Principles for his newspaper, you'll notice as he leans forward to sign the Declaration of Principles that, although every other person's face in the scene is well lit, and up to that point his face has been very well and clearly lit, there's going to be a shadow now cast over his face. And this starts to indicate the first step in his eventual decline from being this very idealistic young man who wants to make the world a better place to this very corrupt, rich, and selfish older man. So, let's have a look at the clip.
What are you going to do, Charlie? Declaration of Principles. Don't smile, Jedediah. Got it already.
See, as he's moved forward, his face goes into shadow as he prepares to sign the Declaration of Principles. But the other characters, Jedediah Leland and Mr. Bernstein, I forget Mr. Bernstein's first name, their faces are still well lit. So this is a very deliberate lighting effect. It foreshadows Kane's eventual decline into corruption.
You don't want to make any promises, Mr. Kane, you don't want to keep.
He's told, Bernstein here says, while Kane's face is in shadow, "You don't want to make any promises, Mr. Kane, that you won't be able to keep." Now listen to what Kane says, while his face is in shadow.
These will be kept. I'll provide the people of this city with a daily paper that will tell all the news honestly. I will also provide... That's the second sentence you've started with I. People are going to know who's responsible. And they're going to get the truth in the Inquirer, quickly and simply and entertainingly, and no special interests are going to be allowed to interfere with that truth.
So he says there that they're going to get the truth when they read the Inquirer, and honestly. Later on in his life, when he begins a political career, he will in fact start not publishing the truth. He will start publishing propaganda in his paper. So it's very significant that you'll see Leland's face is still very well lit, Bernstein's face is still very well lit, Kane's face is fallen into shadow. So as an actor, Orson Welles needs to know exactly where the fall off of those lights is going to occur, and he needs to make sure that he hits his mark. He needs to be in the correct position when that fall off of the lighting occurs. Now, an entirely new problem is created for actors, since now, as we've discussed in our lesson on production design, often, for matters of cost efficiency, people are no longer filming on a film set that has been constructed for the film anymore. People are often filming in a room that is not much bigger than our own classroom, which has the walls painted blue or green, and in which actors will have to interact with the environment as if there were other sets and characters there, and the actors will somehow have to seem to be believably conversing and interacting with other characters that aren't there and with other sets that aren't there. So let's have a look at a clip from the Star Wars film Attack of the Clones to get an appreciation for the issues that this can create for an actor. So here we have the actor Ewan McGregor. Right now, he's strolling along this environment in which he's in nothing but a very big blue room. So let's have a look at the environment that the filmmakers are going to create around him in post-production in the lab. Alright, so you can see here that we already have the environment now added in around him. I'm just going to reverse this a little, so again you can get an appreciation perhaps for the difference. So let's just take a quick look at this clip. Unfortunately, I am not very good with this mouse yet, so thank you for your patience. These are the dangers of preparing lessons on a new computer. So let's have a look at this scene.
Lines against the...
So now you'll notice that the entire digital background has been added all around him, and he's now interacting with these characters. Now, if you'll notice in the clip, Obi-Wan here is having a conversation with this character who wasn't there before. So he's also walking around in this incredible cloned biology lab, and he has to act believably like he's very surprised by all of this. And you'll notice that he's looking up at this character as he speaks to this character. So he actually has to pretend as if he is actually having a conversation with this character who isn't there while he's giving his performance. So this is a real challenge for actors, because actors are trained to work with other actors. There's often an expression that actors use when they're working together on stage. They'll refer to an actor they like to work with as an actor who will give you things to work with, just by means of gestures or expressions. Well, there's nobody on the set with him to give him something to work with him. So this would be a significant challenge for him as an actor. So he has to make it look believable, as if he is having this conversation with this character who isn't there when the scene is being shot. Another challenge that actors face because of the lack of a live audience is that they can't calibrate their performance according to an audience response. Charlie Chaplin, who is probably the most seen figure of the 20th century, got his initial training in vaudeville and in music halls, often portraying a stage drunk for audiences before he made his character of the Little Tramp famous on film. And for Chaplin, it was a huge challenge, again, to learn how to modulate his performances and act in a way that would be convincingly funny, even though he no longer had the luxury of a live audience to perform to. So here is a clip from Chaplin's film The Great Dictator, in which he has to choreograph his performance as best as possible and assume that the audience will simply understand the joke that he's trying to present to them. So this is a scene from Chaplin's 1941 film The Great Dictator. Now, Chaplin, in this film, is portraying a satire on Adolf Hitler. The character is named Adenoid Hinkle. He's the dictator of a fictitious nation named Tomania. Here, he and one of his aides have just fantasized about him not just being the dictator of Tomania, but emperor of the world. So he has a scene alone where he fantasizes about being emperor of the world. It's quite a famous scene, and it's considered to be one of Chaplin's best bits of pantomime. So let's have a look at this.
Out Caesar, out Nolus, Emperor of the world. My word.
So the dictator here is literally doing a ballet with the world. And now the world is finally in his grasp. He smiles. And as the world is finally in his grasp, it explodes. And he cries over a burst balloon as a young child would. So this is Chaplin very definitely giving you his opinion of dictators in this wonderful little clip from The Great Dictator. Now, in other comedic films, the lack of a live audience is often compensated for by using other properties of film to emphasize the actor's performances. So, close-up shots and editing can be used to emphasize effects of a performance, and then hopefully in that way to compensate for the lack of a live audience. So let's have a look at the famous reveal clip from the end of that Sidney Pollack's film Tootsie, in order to see how a combination of close-up shots and cinematography and editing, I should say, are actually enhancing the comic effect of actors' performances as a sequence near the end of this movie is portrayed. So the setup for this scene is that Dustin Hoffman portrays an out-of-work actor named Michael Dorsey, who has become desperate to find work, so he finally has managed to get a part on a soap opera using an assumed identity, Dorothy Michaels. So he has been dressing and performing as a woman, has landed a role on this soap opera as a woman, and has actually become a major soap opera star. This has caused his life to completely spin out of control. He is in a state of absolute desperation towards the end of the film because his life has become so badly out of control, trying to maintain his false identity as Dorothy Michaels and his real identity as Michael Dorsey. So he talks to his agent to try and get out of the contract for the soap opera. His agent tells him there's no way the contract has only a one-way option, and that option belongs to the studio. So Michael learns that because there's been a mix-up in the editing room of the soap opera, that a crucial scene in the soap opera is going to actually have to be shot live in front of a live audience. So Michael sees this as his opportunity to get out of his contract. Now, other crucial characters are a director who is very successful, who feels he is very successful with women and doesn't understand why he can't get Dorothy to like him. There's another actor who has been sexually harassing Dorothy. There is Michael's roommate. There is a middle-aged man who also has a crush on Michael and has asked, or I should say Dorothy, and has asked Dorothy to marry him. And there is Michael's girlfriend who also auditioned for the part in the soap opera, didn't get it, and doesn't know that Michael had actually received the part on the soap opera. So just look at all of these actors' performances, and also look at how cinematography and editing are used to enhance the comic effects of their performances. So they're about to begin shooting live.
Let us all raise our glasses to our guest of honor, Miss Emily Kimberly.
So here is Michael as Dorothy Michaels playing Emily Kimberly on the soap opera.
For many years to come.
This is the man. Sorry?
I cannot tell y'all how deeply moved I am. I never in my
Michael's
life
girlfriend.
imagined that I would be the object of so much genuine affection.
Director.
It makes it all the more difficult for me to say what I'm not going to say. Yes. I do feel it's time to set the record straight. You see, I didn't come here just as an administrator, Dr. Brewster. I came to this hospital to settle an old score.
What score?
Director,
My father was
that's
a brilliant man. He built this hospital. What you don't know is that to his family, he was an unmerciful tyrant, an absolute dodo bird.
Oh, no, not live.
Get back to the crowd there. My mother, his wife, to drink. In fact,
they're trying to get her back on script for him.
The son and wife, he were recluse, and the oldest daughter, the pretty one, the charming one, became pregnant when she was 15 years old and was driven out of the house. In fact, she was so terrified that she would, that the baby daughter would bear the stigma of illegitimacy that she decided to change her name, and she contracted a disfiguring disease. After moving to Tangiers, which is where she raised the little girl as her sister. But
So this gentleman here on the right is the other actor who has been sexually harassing Michael on the set of the soap.
her one ambition in
Any
life
preference to shots on this one, Rita?
was to become a nurse. So she returned to the States and joined the staff right here at Southwest General. When she worked here, she knew she had to speak out wherever she saw injustice and inhumanity. God save us. You do understand that, don't you, Dr. Brewster?
I never laid a hand on her.
Yes, you did. And she was shunned by all you nurses, too.
Give me something, one. I don't need backs. 2 and 3, go left and right.
What you call it?
No, 2, go left. 3, go right.
You doctors who found her out. But she was deeply,
That's the production assistant just tossing the script to the wind.
by her brother. It was this brother who, on the day of her death, swore to the good Lord above that he would follow in her footsteps and just
Don't get it.
owe it all up to her, but on her terms,
God, here come the terms.
as a woman, and just as proud to be a woman as she ever was. For I am not Emily Kimberly, the daughter of Dwayne and Alma Kimberly. No, I'm not.
I'm Edward Kimberly, the reckless brother of my sister Anthea.
Holy Christ! It's a formula!
Edward Kimberly, who has finally vindicated his sister's good name. I'm Edward Kimberly. Edward Kimberly. And I'm not mentally ill, but proud and lucky.
So the gentleman who you saw drop the sandwich was the middle-aged man who's in love with Dorothy and has proposed to her.
And strong enough to be the woman that was the best part of my manhood. The best part of myself.
That is one nutty hospital.
And that final bit was from Michael's roommate.
Commercial.
And you see the director saying, "Now I finally know why she didn't like me." It's a very, very funny movie, and for those of you who haven't seen it, I'm very sorry I've spoiled the end of it for you, but rest assured, there are many, many other funny bits of the film that still make it very much worth looking at, if you're interested. Now, part of the impact that an actor will have on the meaning of a film and on how the film is perceived by the audience is, in fact, the actor's star persona. Well-known actors, movie stars, generally portray a certain consistent image, a certain consistent personality to the public, and filmmakers often use that image and manipulate that image in order to add layers of meaning to a particular film. For instance, John Wayne was a great star of the classical Hollywood period, and over the course of his career, which went from the it was a 40-year career, from the early 1930s, I think Stagecoach was Stagecoach was 39, so The Shootist, which was his last film, I think was around 75, so it was a 4-decade career. A whole range of assumptions and range of meanings and perceptions get attached to John Wayne so that the public perceives John Wayne in a very specific manner. Now, Tom Cruise is currently described as the last great movie star, or the last true movie star in the world. And one thing I found very interesting about Tom Cruise is that in 2 different films released in the year 1999, he gave 2 performances which both relied very heavily on our perception of Tom Cruise as a person who embodies a certain style of masculinity. There is a little bit of foul language in the clip that you're about to see. This is a clip from Paul Thomas Anderson's wonderful 1999 film called Magnolia. And in this film, Tom Cruise plays basically a motivational speaker who trains men who have problems meeting women how to pick up women. So for, I'm presuming, several thousands of dollars, he holds these seminars in hotel rooms where he where he purports to train men to become very successful with women by teaching them various manipulative techniques. So here is the scene when we're first introduced to his character in the film. So as you can see, they're using the same music that Kubrick used at the beginning of 2001. And part of the reason why this scene works so well and why Cruise's performance works so well in this film is that Cruise at this point is one of the biggest movie stars in the world, and he's considered to be an icon of masculinity and of masculine privilege. So he becomes very, very believable as this character.
Respect the cock. And tame the cunt. Tame it. Take it on head first with the skills that I will teach you at work. And say, no. You will not control me. No. You will not take my soul. No. You will not win this game. Because it is a game, guys. You want to think it's not, huh? You want to think it's not, you go back to the schoolyard. You have that crush on big-titted Mary Jane. Respect the cock.
All right, my apologies, folks. I'm still getting used to this new keyboard. So here we have a scene from Stanley Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut. Now, this is an interesting use of Tom Cruise again as well, because, again, we're used to Tom Cruise portraying a certain sort of masculine privilege, and again, a certain sort of man who is usually very successful with women. Now, what's interesting about the way that Stanley Kubrick, this was his final film, Cruise is actually, Tom Cruise's character in this film is actually quite naive and out of his depth in many important ways in this film. So Kubrick actually very deliberately plays against our expectation of Tom Cruise as a man who's very successful with women and who is very confident in matters pertaining to sexuality. So during this scene of the film, he has been invited very late at night to a private masquerade ball. So he's had to he portrays a doctor. He's had to wake up one of his patients in order to rent a costume very late at night. This is now about 1 o'clock in the morning. So as the owner of the costume shop is helping him select a cloak, a mask, and a tuxedo, they hear a noise in another area of the costume shop. So let's just see how this little clip plays out.
What is it? What is this?
going on here?
Oh, Milish.
I can explain everything.
You! Put your knife here! I tell you, I promise I'll kill you! And you, have you no sense of decency? Gentlemen, have you no sense of decency?
Milish, have you gone crazy? We were invited here by the young lady.
Young lady, it is my daughter. And couldn't you see she's a child? You will have to explain to police.
What police?
Say you little whore, I'll kill you for this. I promise, I'll kill you. I'll kill you. Hold on to
Now
my
notice how
daughter
she's
again.
hiding behind Tom Cruise, who has no idea of what to do in this situation.
He is deranged. Doctor, sorry to keep you waiting. Gentlemen, this is now a police letter. You will please stay here until I return.
What is it? Never found them here.
I'm afraid it's out of the question. Doctor, sorry, what color did you say? Black? Black. Gentlemen, please, have the goodness to be quiet for the moment. Couldn't you see I tried to serve my customer? Sorry. And you, little whore, go to bed at once, you depraved creature. I'll deal with you as soon as I serve the gentleman.
Now, we never find out what she said to him, but you can see his reaction from that. So both of those films very deliberately play on Tom Cruise's star persona, this set of assumptions we make about the kinds of characters that he's going to play in films. And filmmakers will often use a star's persona in order to manage the audience's expectations of the performance that the actor will give and of the type of film that they're going to see. Now, generally speaking, stars are characterized into two types of stars. We have personality stars, which would be on the left an actor like Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney Dangerfield began his career as a stand-up comedian, and he very famously adopted a persona of the guy who gets no respect, and he's constantly complaining, "No respect, I get no respect." That was his tagline. He basically plays the same character, the same personality in every role they take. So that would be a personality star. They're hugely well known, but basically they portray the same character. They don't have a lot of acting range. Rodney Dangerfield would have been a character like that. Paul Rubens, who plays Pee Wee Herman, would also be a personality star. A character star would be someone like Tom Cruise or like Marilyn Monroe, tends to play the same kinds of characters, but also can have a great deal of dramatic range, which can be called on when a particular role demands it. Now, in terms of styles of acting and approaches that actors take to acting, the dominant style of screen performance from the 1930s to the 1950s was a style of screen performance called technical acting. And because at that point, actors would usually, for the most part, get their training on the stage and then migrate from stage to the screen. Again, in the early, during the early sound period from the mid-1920s to the 1950s, actors needed to have a very effective vocal skills and needed to be in control of their voices. So this style of acting called technical acting emerges. Actors are trained in the theater, and your job in the theater as an actor is to make sure that you are seen, often from a large distance away. The seats in the back of the theater might be about 100 yards away from you, so people need to see you very clearly. So a technical actor focuses on imitating sounds, giving facial expressions, getting gestures correctly. A technical actor isn't trying to portray a character's inner world. They're trying to portray the character so you experience the character outwardly. They try to be accurate in the way that the character would appear, and the way the character would sound, and the way the character would talk, and the way the character would move. And this is called technical acting. So they're building up they're building the character from the outside. They want you to see and hear this character. Technical actors will often talk about getting a voice right, getting a walk right, getting some Anthony Hopkins, when he was talking about performing in a film called Nixon, talked about how he struggled with getting Richard Nixon's smile right. So here's an example of a technical performance by an actor named James Cagney. So here in this clip, Cagney plays a man in prison who's just found out that his mother has died. So as you can see in that clip, Cagney is very interested in giving you the facial expressions, giving you the gestures, and letting you see the range of emotions go from shock to grief, and then to outright anger and rage at the death of his mother. It's very much a performance that he is constructing by consciously thinking as an actor, what would a person going from shock to grief to rage look like and sound like, and what would that character likely do? Now, a method actor works pretty much from the outside in. Method acting was an approach brought to cinema in the 1950s, featuring an entirely new generation of actors, among them Marlon Brando, Paul Newman, Shelley Winters, Montgomery Clift. Whereas technical actors work on the outside, so they want you to see and hear their characters. Method actors work from the inside. They decide how their character feels, what their character's life story has been. Why is their character reacting in the way that their character is? So they ground themselves in what they believe is the emotional and psychological reality of the character, and they work outwards. The job of the actor is not to construct sounds and sights on and gestures on the outside of the character, but rather to understand what the character's inner psychological and emotional life is like, and to project that outwards. So here's a famous scene portrayed by two great method actors, Marlon Brando and Rod Steiger, who was also an absolutely wonderful actor. So this is a famous scene from a famous film called On the Waterfront. So you'll notice that the gestures aren't as intense. The way they use their voices isn't as constructed. As a matter of fact, they sometimes mumble and slur their lines. It's hard to see them. But you'll notice that their eyes are shining in this scene. They're portraying a very intense emotion. There's a lot of feeling coming through in this scene.
Okay, Daddy. How much you weigh, son? And you weighed 168 pounds. You were beautiful. You could have been another Billy Khan. That skunk we got you for the manager. He brought you along too fast.
It wasn't him, Charlie. It was you. Remember that night in the garden? You came down my dressing room and said, "Kid, this ain't your night. We're going for the price on Wilson." You remember that? This ain't your night. My night. I could have taken Wilson apart. So what happens? He gets the title shot outdoors in a ballpark, and what do I get? A one-way ticket to Palookaville. You was my brother, Charlie. You should have looked out for me a little bit. You should have taken care of me just a little bit so I wouldn't have to take them dives for the short end money.
Well, I had some bets down for you. You saw some money.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it. It was you, Charlie.
So again, different style of acting, trying to understand how these characters feel on the inside, and then trying to project that outwardly. So method actors, rather than getting the training on stage and simply by performing on stage that technical actors would often get, method actors would actually go to an acting school in New York called the Actors Studio, and will often participate in exercises that ask them to recall how things felt. So they'll work on sense recall exercises. Were you ever stung by a bee? How did that feel? Try to imagine how that felt and then react to it. Or emotional memory. How did you feel after your first significant relationship broke up? Were you devastated? How did that feel? Relate that to what this character is feeling. So, whereas a technical actor learns their craft through performing on stage over decades and decades, and years and years. Now, nowadays, there really isn't a distinct training for technical acting and method acting. Nowadays, most acting schools train actors in both techniques, but people will often look at a performance and say, oh, that person must be a method actor, and that person must be a technical actor. So I'm just going to show you a clip of a scene that is portrayed between one of the greatest technical actors of the 20th century and one of the great method actors of the 20th century as well. And just see if you can spot the technical actor and the method actor.
Is it safe?
Just asked him, is it safe?
Tell me what to hit first. Is it safe? Yes, it's safe. It's very safe. So safe you wouldn't believe it. Is it safe?
So this is Dustin Hoffman.
It's not safe. It's very dangerous. Be careful. Relax. Come on. Oh. Okay. That hurt? No. I should think it would. Should take better care of your teeth. You have quite a cavity here. Is it safe? I can't.
Think he knows?
Of course he knows he's being very stubborn. Please don't. No. No. Okay. Huh? Is it not remarkable? Simple oil of cloves, and how amazing the results. Life can be that simple. Relief, discomfort. Now, which of these I next apply, that decision is in your hands. So, take your time. Tell me, is it safe? Please stop.
All right, so for those of you who haven't been able to guess, I'm not surprised you haven't been able to guess, because really, in terms of how the audience experiences the performance, there's no sure way to tell whether an actor is using a method approach or a technical approach. They really are two different ways of achieving the same goal. So, just to for if any of you are still wondering who's the method actor and who's the technical actor, Dustin Hoffman here is one of the great method actors of the 20th century, and this gentleman, Laurence Olivier, is one of the great technical actors of the 20th century. So, just to reiterate, the approaches to acting between method and technical acting really are two different ways of achieving the same goal. You can't actually look at an actor's performance and say, oh, that's technical acting, or oh, that's method acting. The reason I chose this particular clip is there's an interesting anecdote behind it. While they were making this film, this, of course, is a scene that involves torture. So you have this character who's been kidnapped. He's been locked up for a while, played by Dustin Hoffman, and then Laurence Olivier will come in and torture him. So Hoffman felt that in order to create an emotional and psychological reality to play for this character, he would lock himself up in his apartment for a week, not eat anything, and make sure he was sleep deprived and not shower. So Hoffman shows up on the set to film this scene looking absolutely haggard and absolutely terrible. Laurence Olivier has a great night's sleep, has a good breakfast, strolls onto the set, takes one look at Dustin Hoffman, and very famously says, with great shock on his face, "Dear boy, just act. It's so much easier if you just act." It's a very funny story, but it really sort of demonstrates the disparity between the two approaches. On screen, you can't really tell the difference. You can see the end performance, but method acting and technical acting are simply two different roads to achieving that same end performance. Now, often an actor themselves will become an element of the visual design and of the production design of the film. Often, actors will be encouraged to perform, to use gestures in certain ways in order to enhance effects that the filmmakers are trying to achieve with the film. The performer's movements will be integrated with, as you saw with Orson Welles a little earlier, with the lighting scheme of the film, with the camera position of the film, and with any movements that the camera are going to make. So I'm about to show you a clip from Murnau's famous film Nosferatu, one of the first significant adaptations of Bram Stoker's Dracula. The actor chosen for the film, Max Schreck, to play the character Count Orlok, who's really the Dracula character, was a very tall, thin, lean actor, and he was given a makeup which gave him rat-like claws and rat-like teeth and pointed ears. So you have this tall, thin, rat-like character, and he lives in a castle which, again, has tall, thin archways. So the physicality of the actor corresponds with the actual dimensions of the production design, and the actor uses this nightmarish, stalking body language. He's slow, how the vampire is slow, however the vampire is constantly moving forward and stalking his victim, I should say. So let's just watch this quick clip from Nosferatu and see how the actor is actually used as an element of production design in some cases. Oh, my apologies. So here we have this tall, thin doorway. This character, Harker, is looking through it, or actually his name is Hutter in this film, is looking through it in sheer terror. And here comes the vampire, and notice how the very tall, thin, lean vampire stalks through this doorway. So the actor himself corresponds with the production design of the film. and becomes an element of the production design of the film. Actors are also often chosen because they embody certain types of people, either social types of people or psychological types of people. During our discussion, for instance, on Russian formalism and Soviet montage, we were discussing how the Soviet montage filmmakers often would cast actors because they looked convincing as representatives of a certain class of people. And this is what's referred to as social typage. The actors are used to represent a certain class of persons. So we're going to look at a clip from Eisenstein's famous film, Battleship Potemkin, where the actors are literally chosen to embody types of, literally, people of different social classes just because of, by virtue of the way that the actors physically look. Their physical looks correspond with members of certain social classes. So this is a film which depicts a famous mutiny in the 19th century aboard a Russian battleship called the Potemkin, in which a bunch of sailors basically mutinied and took over the battleship. What happened was an incident in which several sailors were complaining that they were being given rotten meat and rotten food and were ordered to be executed by firing squad, and were thrown under a tarpaulin and were about to be shot. However, the other sailors decided at that point they'd had enough and revolted. This was later considered to be one of the crucial events leading up to the Russian Revolution, although it had no significant political outcome of its own. So here we have, this is my favorite character here, this is the priest. And you'll notice how this actor, bring the unruly to reason, O Lord. Here are the soldiers cowering under a tarpaulin. Now, this being the Soviet period, the Russian Revolution has happened by the time this film is made. So the church is very badly looked upon in Soviet Russia. Marx himself said religion is the opiate of the masses. So this actor with his wild, unruly hair and thick beard has been chosen because he portrays this very sinister, fanatical side of the church that of the church that was often associated with enabling the persecution of the lower classes in Russia. So you'll notice here that this priest physically looks like a very deranged person. Now here we have the sailors. They're in their uniforms. Notice how they tend to have very roundish faces. The sailors have roundish faces. And notice how the officers tend to have these long, lean faces. So again, long, lean, upper-class, aristocratic people, they have a very different physical look than the sailors who have very round faces associated with the lower classes. And then again, you have this absolutely crazy-looking priest. So here's an example of a filmmaker using typage, casting particular actors because they embody social types of people. You have the actor playing the clergy, the actors playing the sailors. Again, the lean faces of the officers, they're playing with their swords. They have waxed mustaches. The sailors are actually cowering under the tarpaulin now. And again, the round faces of the other sailors. Actors are also often chosen because they embody certain psychological types of characters as well. So I'm going to show you a clip from a film called The Witches of Eastwick, in which Susan Sarandon is chosen for her performance in this film because she very well embodies a psychological type of a very shy, restrained, insecure person who is coming out of her shell. And Jack Nicholson portrays, again, very well this social type of a very eccentric and a very charismatic and a very bold person. So notice how notice just in this short clip how these two characters with their very different psychological types play off each other. So what's going on in this scene is that Susan Sarandon's character has approached Jack Nicholson's character for some instruction on improving her cello playing, and Jack Nicholson says her problem as a cellist is that she's too restrained, she's too timid, she kills the passion in all of her cello performances.
Try. Let it go when you're afraid of your great passion and you let it out. I can take it. I want it.
See how bold he is, whereas she's very shy, she's very unsure of herself.
Yes. Yes. That's it. Relax. Breathe into it. Don't tighten up. That's it.
Now notice her character
Feel
transformation
it.
here.
All right. That's it. Yes. Yes, that's right. Now. That's right. You feel that? Let it wash over you. Let it tickle you.
And she's becoming bolder like him now. All right, my apologies, folks. Still getting used to this new computer. At any rate, what any performer, what any actor hopes to invoke in an audience is a response from the audience. And initially, the members of the audience will achieve, when they're watching what a performer is doing on screen and listening to what a performer is doing on screen, the audience will arrive at an interpretive response. They'll understand that certain facial expressions and certain gestures indicate that the character is experiencing certain kinds of emotions, and this influences an emotional response in members of the audience. We feel empathy for these characters. So actors are always encouraging you to try to relate emotionally to what their characters are thinking and feeling and going through. So here's an example again, a little bit later from the scene, a little bit later from a film I showed you a clip from just before, Battleship Potemkin. After the battleship has achieved a successful mutiny and the sailors have taken over the battleship seeks port in the harbor of Odessa. A great crowd of civilians has gathered around the battleship to celebrate their successful mutiny. However, the Tsar has sent soldiers to deal with the crowd, leading to a very famous, one of the more famous sequences in all of film history, called the Odessa Steps sequence, again from the film Battleship Potemkin. But watch at how this scene encourages you to have an empathetic response to the events that are being portrayed, how you are meant to feel the terror and the horror of the people as the Tsar's army charges towards them with rifles, and how the performances of the actors encourage you to empathize with the experience that they're undergoing. So here we have this woman with her baby carriage on the steps as the Tsar's soldiers are advancing. She looks with horror and shock as the soldiers advance. The soldiers are shooting people. She is shot. The baby carriage is teetering. We see the people running in terror from the soldiers. You see the look of agony on her face as she dies. She dies now, and the baby carriage starts to fall down the stairs. And people are reacting in horror at this. So I challenge anybody watching those images, the expression of agony and then of emptiness on the woman's face as she dies, and the horrified and shocked reactions of the others as they watch the baby carriage careen down the steps and themselves are attacked and killed by the Tsar's troops. I challenge anybody not to have a strong emotional and empathic response to those performances. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed our lesson on acting. Please do let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you at our next class. Thank you.